Welcome to Get the Intel, presented by VAs for Construction. This podcast is your go-to for straightforward advice and stories from the construction industry. Join us as we talk with contractors who share their experiences and experts who offer practical tools and techniques to help your business run smoother. Whether you're looking to solve a problem or simply seeking inspiration, we're here to help you manage your work and enjoy life. Tune in for insights that matter to you.
Hello, Chad Gill here. I am the host of the Get the Intel podcast, where I talk with leaders in contracting, management, and really anyone helping us do business better. This episode is brought to you by VAs for Construction. VAs for Construction it provides tailored support personnel for construction contractors. So whether it's project admins, estimating support, or executive assistants, leveraging remote personnel can keep your team doing what they love while getting the data you need. So visit us at VAs4construction.com to see how we can free up capacity in your team. So joining me today is Paul Meadows, a professional certified EOS implementer and president of Integrated Technology Group for the 16 years. As a professional EOS implementer, he has worked with leadership teams to help them achieve their business goals. And with experience growing an entrepreneurial business and an undergraduate degree in business and economics with a graduate degree in executive leadership, he's perfectly equipped to guide companies through the EOS process. He's also been an IT professional for 25 years, a business owner for 16, and an entrepreneur for his entire life, which does make him older than me. And that's not important, but we should mention it. Paul, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me, Chad.
So, entrepreneur for life. So, how does the path go to get you to ITG and then ultimately EOS?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the entrepreneur for life. I'd say entrepreneur since at least middle school or high school, because I can remember at about that age, I talked my mom into giving me my entire week's worth of lunch money on Monday. I would take that lunch money to the store, buy the biggest bag of candy I could buy. And then I would sell that candy out of my locker all week long and turn my $5. Back then it was, that's how long ago it was. $5 was enough to eat lunch on for a week. I'd take that $5, and by the end of the week, I had not only had lunch every day, but I also had $5 or $10 to spare. And so I think that was about the time I realized, hey, I really want to be a business owner and kind of grow a business.
I think that's awesome. And I love those stories because I think so many entrepreneurs, it's not surprising that they, when you look back, you're not surprised they end up running companies or owning companies, doing stuff like that, because, it's that innate desire of, hey man, I'll take a chance on myself and see how it goes. And that's risk tolerance. That's, that's everything, I'm just gonna be the master of my own, destiny, my own travels, I guess, the way it is.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because, my career path didn't lead me to, the opportunity to be an entrepreneur right away. You mentioned that I'm older than you. And so I think it's an appropriate time to also let the audience know that you were responsible for folding my roommate's laundry when I was a senior at VMI and you were a freshman. So, we go way back, but, after, post VMI, I spent 5.5 years in the military, and then I worked in higher ed and K through 12 for a number of years, then went to work for a healthcare practice. And it was really working for that privately held healthcare practice that, I saw a group of individuals who were great doctors, but they were also really good businessmen. And 3.5 years with them really gave me the bug, to take, my occupational expertise and turn that into a business. Not unlike a lot of entrepreneurs, but unfortunately, most of us, when we start a business because we're good at what we do, we have no idea what we're getting into.
Right. Yeah. It's like, what do you want to do for a living? I'm going to start an IT company. You're like, that's fantastic. You're really going to do a boatload of bookkeeping and paperwork and relationship management, and you're going to have all these customers and employees. You're like, no, that's not at all what I'm going to do. Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah, sales, HR, operations, all of it initially, especially when you're trying to, bootstrap a company from ground zero. You're doing it all.
Absolutely. And you don't feel like you're really good at any of it for a long time.
Yeah.
So EOS implementer, what made you get, what made the leap to that?
Um, I mean, that's a really important question because, and it's a story that I like to share often because, as a business owner, I think I can connect to entrepreneurs on a certain level because I think we all go through these experiences where, we kind of hit a ceiling or we're struggling, to make the business what we, originally thought it could be. And it's not because we're not good at whatever our occupation is, whether you're a drywall guy, a roofer, an IT person, welder, whatever it is, we totally unanticipate how difficult it is, to leverage, whatever our good occupational skills are into a full blown business. And that's where I was at, was really excited. The business began to grow right out of the gate, even though it was that magical year of 2008 when the economy was crashing. Fortunately, I had a service that, a group of people needed and medical, I got a lot of referrals to medical practices and, so my business began to grow right out of the gate. And I thought, oh, this is a great decision. This is easy. But then I got 10 years in and realized that I had hit such a ceiling that essentially I had become a slave to my own creation. Like I had created this business and now just to try to keep it growing, I was working 60, 70 hours a week every week. And, my kids were at that age where they're participating in sports and theater and all kinds of activities. And I'm missing things with my family and, dealing with the constant stress of trying to figure out how to do what I envision doing. And, so I began to really search myself for answers. And, in that search, fortunately, I landed on one of the things that I think is really important that we'll talk about is a peer group. And in that peer group, I had the opportunity to, talk to somebody about Traction, a book that, I'd heard about through, an email message and begin to dig into that book and pretty quickly realize that, holy cow, not only has somebody experienced the exact same things that I'm experiencing as a business owner, but they've also, answered all the questions and put them all in a book. So, even a dumb VMI guy like me, all I have to do is execute. I just got to follow the directions. And that was super appealing to me. And so in 2019, we began to implement EOS in our own company. And my partner and my finance director at that time were totally on board, all in. And it made such an enormous difference in such a short period of time for us that, I was automatically a fan. 2020 rolls around. Most companies are in jeopardy of going under. And, we didn't even have to lay anyone off or anything like that because of the work that we had done in our EOS process in 2019. So since then, we've just continued to grow and grow. And as I talk to other business owners about, what's really at the root of some of our more recent success, it's EOS. And I've become so passionate about telling other business owners what we did in hopes that it could help them, especially when I think about what about the guy or the gal who's exactly where I was, in 2019 when I just felt like, man, I don't have any answers. And this thing that I, just poured myself into for 10 years and given so many sacrifices for, it's not going anywhere. And that's a miserable place to be. And so, the opportunity to share that with people who are in that place is, pretty incredible to me. And so I decided 2 years ago to purchase an EOS worldwide franchise and did all the training to become a professional implementer. And now, I get a lot of joy out of, the opportunities to, help other companies implement EOS. And it's awesome to see them, grow as a result of the work that we're doing together. Very fulfilling work.
It is. I mean, I see it in the coaching side. It's like, when it's just such a pleasure to be able to help somebody avoid an obstacle that you ran head first into and remember hitting it. And you're like, no, we can go around that. We can go over just better ways, man. Don't do what I did. Let's counsel through that. But I interviewed a guy earlier. His name was JJ Levinsky, and his thing was like, first thing he did when he started his company, he was leaving another company and coming in to start his own. He's like, I hired a CFO I couldn't afford. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's and it was an interesting story and a great way to go about it. But when you think like entrepreneurs and starting a company, or maybe you've already got one and you're trying to figure out, what do I need to do to get a handle on it? What do you feel like every entrepreneur needs? What are those key ingredients where you're like, hey, do this because this is the keys to success for it?
Yeah, great question. And I think I think every entrepreneur starting out, there's three things that they could really focus on that will help them a great deal, no matter where they're starting out, whether they're getting a lot of funding and hiring people right away and they're going to, immediately, have a sizable organization, or even if they're just like me, back in the day when it was just me starting out and I was bootstrapping the company. Without regard to those things, I think every entrepreneur needs three things. Number one, I think every entrepreneur needs a peer group, because pretty quickly you're going to get to a place where you look to your left and you look to your right in your own company, and there's no one who has experienced what you're experiencing and can give you the foresight to know, how to move forward. Or, frankly, just sometimes we need the encouragement, from people who have been through similar things. And that's where I think a peer group is, really instrumental. And then the second thing is, you, Chad, I mean, you need a good coach. And sometimes, initially starting out, people may look at, the cost of a coach and, and say, well, maybe they'll feel like the guy who felt like he paid too much for a CFO. But I think, a coach is an investment, and it's an investment in yourself, because sometimes we have to be outside of ourselves, or have to have a perspective from outside of ourselves to really help us see, things that may be a blind spot to us, and help us to work around those things. So I think there's some value there. And, for me back in, when I was really starting, before I even started this EOS journey, I had a coach. He didn't call himself coach, but he was just a person who was 10, 15 years in advance of me in business, that I knew I could call on at any time and say, hey, here's what I'm dealing with. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And not to be confused with a consultant, because this person never said, well, listen, you need to do this. What he did really well was he asked me really good questions to help me think through, whatever the challenge or issue was. He shared some experiences, but didn't really, share a lot of theory. It was, he stuck to, hey, here's what I've done, and this has worked for me. Don't know if that's going to work for you or not, but let's talk about it. And so that was extremely helpful. So that's number two. The third thing is a system. You've just got to have a system, because most of us, when things, when our business becomes complex enough with just two or three people, if we don't have a system in place for how we're going to operate, then we have a tendency to be all over the board. And I think you and I have something in common in that we both sort of fit in that visionary category, where it's like, a new idea every 5 minutes. And, for the people around us that we surround ourselves with to run the business, if we don't have an operating system in place, we don't have good structure, good framework, then it can feel like they're constantly on a roller coaster ride. We're enjoying the heck out of it, but some people don't like roller coasters. So those are three things: a coach, an operating system, and a peer group. Definitely need those three things.
So I definitely understand. I mean, I agree. I wouldn't be in the business I'm in if I didn't think a coach was valuable. I think that people do get confused about what a coach is versus a consultant. Even myself fall prey to that sometimes, but, a lot of times, you have the answers inside of you. You just need somebody to kind of pull you out of the battle to say, hey, let's take a look at our game plan. And then, a peer group, I'm in entrepreneurs organization. That's a peer group for me. And it's great. I think you're the, I tell our kids and stuff like that, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. And that works the same way, I think, in business is, you got to get around people that, some people that are going to lead you, some people that you can lead, and some people that can walk alongside of you to kind of give you that humanity that you need inside your company and to make it so that you understand, hey, I'm not alone here. These aren't new problems. They're new to me, but they're not new.
Yeah.
And then the system. I know you and I are both fans of EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, but there's lots and lots of systems. And I think that probably the most important thing is like what you're saying, have a system. But you're an implementer. So if you do buy into a system, what does the implementer do versus the system itself?
Yeah. The implementer is just, my job when I'm working with a company is not to, become ingrained in the organization, not to be there, for forever and ever. My job is also not to be a consultant because I think you nailed an important piece of what a good implementer does. A good implementer recognizes that the answer's in the room. We work with leadership teams, and when we say the answer's in the room, that doesn't mean the answer's coming from Paul. It's coming from somebody in that leadership team. And so, we just do a really good job of facilitating sometimes difficult conversations that help those answers come out. As an implementer, my job is really, there's certainly some teaching and coaching, teaching how to use certain tools, to improve the organization. And then the coaching comes, afterwards. And I love, thinking about, I'm a sports guy. And so, when I think about the differences between coaches, consultants, and implementers, it's an interesting thing. Coaches, if you stop and think about it, tell me the last time you saw a head football coach run on the field and execute a play against the opposing team. They just don't do it, right? And but those coaches, they have their playbook, and the first thing they do is teach. Okay, here's how you run the play. They do walkthroughs. But then beyond that, once in practice, once the team is executing the play, they coach on the little pieces and the little aspects of that play that are going to improve it. So the first thing, teaching is what we do. We teach the tools as an implementer, and then we do a little bit of coaching on how to execute using those tools. And so that's really, in my mind, that's really about the only area where there's some overlap between what you do as an executive coach and what I do as an implementer. My job is just to teach people what EOS is and how to best use it, to make their business better, how to put that system in place. But where I think there's some, huge opportunities for symbiotic relationships between implementers and coaches is, as when I finish with a session, especially those first 3 sessions where we're really doing a lot of teaching and coaching, when I finish with a session, there's homework for that leadership team to do. And so, as an implementer, I may have a follow-up call or 2 in the course of the time period between sessions, but I'm not with them on a regular basis. Coach, on the other hand, if he's meeting with, at least one of those leaders, on a weekly basis or biweekly basis, there's an opportunity to look at that task list and, do some real coaching on, what accomplishing good looks like versus checking a box. And, I think that's where a coach can be extremely helpful, not only in the execution of the task, but really kind of digging in, with that leader and helping him or her understand themselves better and understand why certain tasks, are more difficult than others, and allowing them to really learn something about themselves that will, provide long-term dividends in terms of, whatever challenges they face in the future.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think it's, having been involved in, sessions with you and then with our team that we run and stuff like that too. It's, I think I even made a mistake one time of when you and I had a shared client of me answering things, like putting things in there because my let's get this done approach was like, oh, well, I'll just write this. And then I guess to prod you to say, like, why is it so important that as an implementer, you're not just like, you're standing there and you're like, hey, we're going to develop an accountability chart or a process for this thing like that. You, just from your experience, I mean, you probably already have a pretty good idea of where it's going to end up, but I've watched you just keep asking questions and let them get their own. Why is it so important when you're talking about structural things like that, what seems like basic stuff, why
Yeah.
is it so important to you to let them come up with it as opposed to you just saying, hey, look, it's EOS. Here's what it's going to look like. Just do this.
Well, to those of you who have raised kids like me and you, this isn't rocket science. You think about, trying to teach your kids to wash the dishes. If they begin to wash the dishes and they get frustrated and you step in and wash the dishes for them, just, hey, let me just do this for you. They don't really learn a whole lot from that. Sometimes, they've got to struggle a little bit, to actually learn something and take something away from it. And sometimes, honestly, it's difficult to stay on the sidelines. We all have that. Even coaches. I'm sure there are plenty of times in the game where they just want to run out there and execute the play the way it's supposed to be executed. But in doing that, we don't help them to grow or advance. And so that's why we try to be really good facilitators, ask good questions to help them arrive at their own answers. One reason is because we want them to learn, because once we've implemented EOS, that's not the last time that organization or that leadership team is going to run into, some challenge or hit a ceiling. And so it's very important that we, teach them initially in the process how to deal with those things as opposed to just stepping in and taking care of it for them.
And I think it also encourages them to take ownership of it. It's like if it's something they created and it's, everybody will fight harder for their own idea than they will for somebody else's idea, that even if they kind of agree with it.
Yeah.
I think that's an important part of it.
Well, and I think that's the second most important reason that we really try to facilitate coming up with the answer in the room amongst that leadership team, is because if I allow myself to, veer into the lane of consultant, now I'm going to have to take some ownership of whatever decisions are being made. And, if I'm wrong, that could create some challenges. It makes me think about, it makes me think about another parental decision that my wife and I had to make. My son in the 8th grade, he was a little undersized, really wanted to play college sports. Comes home one day and says, Dad, so and so is reclassing. And I said, really? Why is he doing that? And he said, well, he's reclassing in this year because he wants an extra year to grow and develop so that better his chances to play college sports. And I said, oh. He said, Dad, I'd like to do that too. And I thought my wife was going to fall out of the chair because she was a first grade teacher when we got married, and my son had good grades, but as we thought about it, he obviously was, he was a summer birthday kid. And so he really was, from a maturity perspective, a little bit behind, his class. And so, ultimately what we landed on is allowing him to make the decision. And why would we allow an 8th grader to make that big life decision? Well, number one, it gives us an opportunity to walk him through what making a good informed decision looks like. But number two, it's about the ownership of the decision. If either of us had made that decision for him and anything went wrong, then we're going to have to own, that outcome as well. And we just felt like, this is an opportunity to teach him, a very valuable lesson on how to make a big decision. And ultimately, if it doesn't turn out the way he wants, then, he's got to take ownership of that. And that's really what we're trying to do with leadership teams. If I become a consultant and I say, no, I think you should do it this way. Well, then, and if they take my advice, then I'm going to have to own that outcome. And if it's wrong, then it's on me. It will be easy for that leadership team to just say, well, we got bad advice. Now, on the other hand, if I can lead them to make a decision, even if that decision is wrong, they're learning something. And, we were talking about this earlier. I firmly believe that we should always be winning or learning. If we're not winning, then we should be learning something. There's no losing. Losing is just when things don't go right and we don't learn anything from it. So,
Right.
We want to make sure we're facilitating in a way that that leadership team is either winning or learning.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And like I said, it's a waste of money if you lose on something, if something goes poorly and you don't try to figure out what you can gain from it, then it is truly a loss. But if you can gain something from it and it makes maybe it was a big mistake, maybe it was a small mistake, but either way, if you can recover that one and say, all right, well, that's fine, but that's one off the list we won't make again, then
Yeah.
you're moving forward. If it's like, I just want to put it out of my mind and never think about it again, then you're going to see it again, almost identically, because you
Yeah.
haven't changed anything.
Yeah, and I think another interesting facet of this too is, sometimes when I'm doing an implementation and I've got a leadership team trying to solve an issue. I may have in my mind a thought already of what I think the solution is, and so my challenge is keeping my mouth shut and just asking really good questions and really, allowing them to come up with their own conclusions. And sometimes they come up with the same conclusion that I thought. And I have to be really careful not to ask leading questions. I'm not asking questions to try to lead them to my conclusion. So in doing that, sometimes they surprise me. They come up with a conclusion that I think I would have never thought of that, but I think that's the right answer. And so we have to kind of put our pride aside sometimes, when as it relates to what we've learned and what we already know, and just be careful not to make the assumption that, we already know the answer. And I think that's, really beneficial to that leadership team as well.
Yeah, and I think having gone through it, in my own companies and then now helping other companies through it at the same time, it's just more and more you see that so much knowledge is in these successful leadership teams, and sometimes it's just a matter of getting them to sync up together. You'll see people where you think they're like, hey, I don't think this person's going to make it through the program because they never really did what we want them to do, and they shouldn't be on our leadership team. And then all of a sudden they become a star and they rise. And then there's people who, once you start putting accountability and stuff like that in place, suddenly they self-separate, self-filter out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a very interesting process to go through. And then I only want to say it's a process to go through. Implementing the system is a process, but then running it over time. And how do you avoid, what we see is a lot of drift. We'll get a company in, it's 2 years, plus or minus to get it fully implemented. And then there's 2 years of you run really strong on it and you see some dramatic results. And then suddenly you start thinking about, I don't know if I need this part of it so much. Let me tailor it to mine, and then you start to drift from that. And then your performance drifts too. How do you counsel people to stay away from that?
Yeah, that's a great question too, Chad. And I think there's a really short answer and then a little more involved answer. The short answer is even once you graduate, we refer to company graduating from EOS implementation as now this leadership team is capable of running the company on EOS without the help of an implementer. What I've seen is, companies that even they've been running, on EOS for 3, 4, 5 years, they'll bring in an EOS implementer, to do an annual meeting. Like they're going to have a quarterly meeting, 3 quarterly meetings throughout the year, and then they'll do an annual meeting. But just bringing that implementer back in on occasion just to run their meeting, to give some feedback. And it's for that very reason, because, what happens is, and I experienced this myself. Once I became an implementer, my company had been running on EOS for 3 years. We had graduated, and immediately when I became an implementer and started getting that training, I realized, wow, there's some things that we drifted on, and that's just a natural phenomenon. So I think it's important, to be self-aware that that's a likelihood, that could happen, and so finding a way to bring in a professional implementer once in a while to run a meeting just to give you that feedback. And the reason that's so important is because in our community, one of the things I love the EOS worldwide community. But one of the things I can tell you that, is really important is we talk a lot about EOS purity. And really what we're talking about is doing EOS the way EOS has proven to be, productive and successful. When we begin to, kind of make it our own, well, then it becomes Paul OS or Chad OS. It's not EOS anymore. And, sometimes, at least for a short period of time, you may see some benefit to doing Paul OS or Chad OS, but it's been proven time and time again over time. If you're coming up with your own variation of EOS, more often than not, it's it's more detrimental than it is productive or successful. And so, and for me personally, I said it earlier, and I'm only half joking when I say I'm not a very creative guy, but you give me a plan and, and just tell me to go execute it. If it's a well-written plan, then, I love that, because I don't really want to have to use my creativity because it just doesn't exist in a lot of cases. I think those creative entrepreneurs that are big thinkers sometimes, they get in their own way because, they want to, create their own variations.
Yeah, they want to build everything. You see them in their, they don't even go to work because they're in their front yard trying to build a better car to drive to work. You're like, dude, aren't you a framer? Like, but yeah, it is. It's funny like that. But I think it's almost like a form check. Like you work out, you get a workout plan, you get a personal trainer. They set it all up for you. They show you how to do it. They teach you all the exercises. Then you go and you work out by yourself for a few months, and kind of tangential to the whole peer group. You get a training partner, and you're even better. And then every now and then you need to go back to that trainer and be like, hey man, my back kind of hurts a little bit. Well, that's not the way you're supposed to squat. Don't you remember? Not so much. So, that all plays into the same idea. But I would have to say that in my experience, and I'm sure, you get this a million times, probably a million out of a million times, you're going to get this. It's like, I get it, Paul. You're an IT guy. Chad, you're this guy. I understand how EOS works for those companies. But, I just don't think you realize my company's different. I got all these different variables. I got all these different, it's not like my insert name, brand, whatever industry. It's not like EOS probably won't work for me. How do you answer that one?
Yeah. It's an objection that comes up a lot. And for me personally, I just point to the facts because one of the things that I've learned about myself is, like most entrepreneurs, I'm a quick start. Like, I'm ready to go, and I'm sure you experience the same. Like an idea pops up, and we're ready to go 100 miles an hour, 0 to 100 in 3 seconds flat on this idea. And I do have that quality, but I also am a high fact finder, which is kind of unusual. And basically, the way I would interpret that is I need just enough data to justify my thoughts about what this idea is. But as soon as I've got that data, I'm ready to go. And so the fact finder in me says, well, let's just look at the data, Chad. EOS worldwide there are literally hundreds of thousands of companies running on EOS tools. We've got I believe the number is 800 now, over 800, professionally trained implementers around the world. And there are a couple of 100,000 of companies, that we've actually done the implementations for. And if you look at the numbers, that cross section of organizations, they're nonprofits, they're, for profits, they are, in finance, they're in construction, they're in technology. I mean, there's just no specific industry vertical or, for profit versus nonprofit. I mean, it's all the same. They are still successful running on EOS, and it's simply because the principles that we incorporate into EOS are just really good principles to do three things: help the leadership team all get on the same page with the vision of the organization, name an organization that doesn't need that, get traction. That is, once we know what the vision is, we've got to have some pieces in place to help us actually execute on that vision, and be healthy as an organization. In other words, being willing to be transparent with one another and be vulnerable with one another when we're trying to solve these big problems. And, if you can do those three things, then you can be successful without regard to nonprofit, for profit, engineering, construction, technology. Doesn't matter, because when you strip away what all those organizations do, at the most basic fundamental layer, all of them need those three things.
Absolutely. No, and it's critical. And once you can kind of get an idea of what that vision is, and it's just easier and more fun to run a company than to be run by a company. And that's that's the difference. That's where the system is. It's like, if you've got a system, and none of us, or very few of us, if any, have gotten into a situation where we're like, I'm just not willing to work hard enough to make this happen. That's just not the case. I've never run into entrepreneurs where they're just unwilling to work hard. Sometimes they're so willing to work hard that they won't slow down to see if there's an easier, smarter, more enjoyable way to do it. They're in the rut of 70, 80 hours a week is what it takes to own a company. And I say, well, not really. Sometimes it's what it takes to start one, but not necessarily to run one.
Yeah, I think I think you're making a valid point there. Sometimes sometimes business owners and leadership teams, they don't want to be in the situation they're in because they do feel like they're being run by the company. That's exactly where I was, and 5 years ago, this company that I created was running me. And it wasn't until we implemented EOS, when we got through our implementation, we began to transition to now we're running the company. And, so when you think about the heavy lift of implementing EOS, for some, leadership teams, they may look at it and go, I don't really want, that seems like a lot of extra work. I don't know if we should do that. And they'll make the decision to do it when the pain of allowing the company to run them becomes so great that pain is above and beyond whatever the anticipated pain of doing that heavy lift to implement EOS. But I'd also say that's where my colleagues and I really come into play, because the lift isn't, I mean, you've been through it. The lift is not incredibly heavy when you have someone sort of guiding you through the process and you're not having to figure it out on your own as you go.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the entrepreneur's biggest problem, is like, everything is bigger when you assume that you're the one that has to do it. But EOS and any system is about, it doesn't have to be you. And it certainly will not be just you. Learning how to share that load and put that, I mean, there's delegation tools, there's one-on-one tools, there's an array of tools to help you get through this. But then it's all about getting your team in there and doing it. I mean, it'd be really hard to win a football game if the quarterback was playing against 11 other people. It's just like on your own. He's a hell of a quarterback, but you're gonna have to be really good to throw it and then run, go catch it, and not get blocked somewhere along the way. And that's what entrepreneurs are trying to do. They're trying to play against 11 on one and feel like, well, it's supposed to be this hard, but it's just not.
Yeah. If I may, I'd like to ask you a quick question to just kind of turn the tables a little bit. We've talked about this a little bit, but I'm interested in hearing your perspective as a coach. What is it like, working with an implementer? Like, how does that, does it make you more effective? Do you feel like you're more effective, when you're working with an implementer? If so, how so?
I think working with what I've really enjoyed and loved about it is, as a coach, for me, a coach is person-centered. Like, I am working with an entrepreneur, and I'm there to make them better, make their company better, I'm focused more on like if it was in your company, I am Paul centered. I'm not an ITG or EOS or any of that stuff. If I can make you better for that company, then that's what I'm trying to do. Get you to think about all those different things, like get capacity and do those kind of things. An implementer with EOS is awesome because they outline and kind of segregate all of the issues, which is a great, that's a whole nother thing in EOS. But they segregate those issues out to a place where you can start to divvy them up about the team and those kind of things. So the structure, the management, and those kind of things, that is stuff that really needs to be taught. Whereas a coach is more about, let's think about this. Let me ask you some questions. Let's get in there. Let's figure out how we can free you to go do these things and, learn to delegate. I do a lot of that. So I think it's just nice because it gives a division of labor so that, I guess it'd be kind of like if you had a really good friend that was also your in the trainer metaphor, they're your fitness trainer and they're a really good friend of yours. They're like, that's great. It's difficult to know when you shift from one role to the other. So when you separate them that way, everybody's in their lane. And I think that does a really good job of kind of letting the coach to be truly a coach. And then the implementer is all about structure and the actual operating, I'm trying to think of another word, not to just reuse EOS, but the operating of the business and the mechanism of the business, where I'm looking more on the person.
Yeah, that's good. When you and I first started talking about this, I just immediately thought, just understanding what I do and having at least a baseline understanding what most executive coaches do. I just felt like, gosh, I don't know why there aren't more coaches and EOS implementers working together, because really, I think it creates a scenario where the client is gonna really benefit a lot. When we're initially implementing EOS, we get to that vision building one day, and we're establishing core values. Just as an example, I think where a coach can be super helpful is we go through this process with the leadership team to sort of identify those core values. But once they're identified, the work's not done there. Then the work is, we've got to make these core values the lens through which we look at everything. And the person who's most responsible for that is probably going to be the person that you're typically working with, that CEO, or, that business owner, that, the top leader. And that person is, more responsible than anybody else in the organization for the culture, which is just a byproduct of the core values. So, that coach then can be with that person on a regular basis and ask some pretty tough questions about, hey, what are you doing to make sure that these core values, are pervasive in your organization? What are your plans? How is that working? And I think that's where you get that, just incredible additional value over what it is, we're able to do as implementers.
We have a graphic that we do, and it's really more of the idea of, when you and your leadership team are going to run your company, and that's the way that it should be. You're managing your leadership. You are the leader. You are making the calls. You're not, in EOS, you're sharing the burden of a lot of that, and also the joy, the responsibility, the accountability, all of that. Now you're running as a team.
Yeah.
And that's EOS implementers and stuff like that, helping to set all of that up. And yeah, coaching is more like, okay, how am I going to approach my team with this? Or, should this be bothering me the way that it is? Or, have you thought about these types of angles? And have you run into something like this before? And so it is a really good symbiotic relationship, because it just allows you to kind of create a complete person and then a complete team. And those two are together, man. There's a lot of success found in those people.
Yeah, and I think it's important. We all recognize that, that CEO, president, founder, they have a huge responsibility in the leadership of the leadership team. And so, when they have an opportunity to benefit from good coaching, that coach is not only making that individual leader better, but he's making the whole team better. Because let's face it, we weren't born with, I truly believe some leaders have good leadership characteristics that they were born with, but I still think, leadership itself is something that's a learned behavior, that even those that were born with some good qualities, it's still a learned experience. And, I think a coach can really expedite that learning and lower the curve.
Oh yeah. Nobody was born being the world's greatest free throw shooter. They were born with particularly skill sets that might lend themselves to be really good at that. It's like people are surprised that an NBA player is really good at golf. You're like, I don't know. They're amazing at physical activity. They're not even, they're not
hand-eye coordination, control.
They're not the same level of human being. They're going to be good at those things, but you see them with, you got free throw shooting specialist coaches that do nothing but make sure that right-handed people can shoot free throws, and left-handed people, that's another coach. So yeah, I think that's really good. But all right. So one last question for you. You're going through EOS. What is the most common hurdle you that you see in companies, either for starting it, or like, what's that linchpin moment when you see somebody go, okay, man, this is going to work? Like, what
Yeah.
is there any kind of thing that you see that's really common like that?
It's in the very first session, and you and I have, experienced this with some of our, common clients. It's in that very first session when we're trying to create the right structure for the organization. And, the one of the biggest challenges that I face, and it's a challenge that, I get it because I did the same thing for years. It's the challenge of, removing all the people and just thinking about the structure. And I have to remind them multiple times during that session, okay, you're a group of consultants. You don't work here, and none of your friends work here. You're a group of consultants, and your job is to tell me over the next 12 months what is the right structure for this organization. How should it look, on that accountability chart in order for you to be successful based on what you know. And, it's just very challenging because we always say structure first, people second. Once we've got the right structure, then we bring the people into the picture. But it's very intentional that we do it that way because we got to make sure we've got the right structure first, for the benefit of the company. Because if we don't, what we'll have a tendency to do as a leadership team is we'll have a tendency to say, well, Chad's a great guy and he can do these things. And so let's, build that position around, give Chad a position that allows him to do these, things that he's really good at. And, and then the minute Chad leaves, we've customized that seat specific to Chad's abilities. And now we got to go find another Chad.
Yeah.
And that's a real challenge, it creates an issue, and we've all done it. I mean, I can think of specific examples where I've done that. So it's not the easiest thing in the world to think about just what does the structure need to look like, and then plug in the people. And if we do that, what we might end up with is, okay, there's this seat. Chad's the right person for this seat. We may have to work with Chad on these two of the 5 roles that are most important. We may have to work with him on these 2 to give him some additional capacity or knowledge, but that's molding Chad to the seat as opposed to developing the seat, to fit Chad. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges I think we face, especially early on.
No, I would agree. I'm so glad you mentioned that because it's such a common thing. You're like, that is the right, that this is where this responsibility lies. But, John's just not good at that. So if we put it here, it's going to make it really, John's not going to be able to do it. And you're like, but is that where it belongs? Because you're not listening to me. John can't do it. I feel like I'm listening to you. One of us is not listening to the other, but I'm not sure it's me on this one. You're like, it's where does the task belong? And then, okay, maybe John doesn't belong there. Maybe, Beth would be much better at this job. And then it's so interesting because when you put those in place, all of a sudden, I think even for me, when I was we were doing our accountability chart, it was one of those things where you're super nervous, but then all of a sudden you find out that it's a big non-secret secret. Everybody already knew who was good at what the fit was. And like, I know you really don't want to do this part of the job. So, is it part of this role? Is it not part of this role? Maybe you really should be our other person, fitting those seats is just a much better situation.
Well, and I think that, that very first session is one of the early opportunities to really develop some team health, because you do have to have those difficult conversations. If you're gonna be successful in that part of the implementation, it requires you to be vulnerable and open and honest with one another about, Chad, do you really, enjoy doing this role? And then, ultimately, sometimes you find out in the initial work, you find out that there's someone there as part of the leadership team who's not actually part of the leadership team if the company was structured the way it really should be. They're there because we think they do great work and we like having them, they're good people, and, all understandable reasons, but not the right reasons to have them, on the leadership team. And so sometimes that creates a little bit of awkwardness too. But at the end of the day, and most of the pushback I get the most during that session is, well, that's not really how we're set up. And I have to reset and go, I understand that. We're not talking about how you're set up. We're talking about, if you're the consultant telling me how I should structure my company, that's just like the company you've been running, what would that structure look like? And so, you talked about, sort of a turning point or inflection point. That's it. When you can get that leadership team to finally be willing to say, this is what it should look like, as opposed to this is what it does look like. That's that's a little bit of a turning point for that leadership team. They've just gotten beyond their, one of their first big tests on whether or not they're willing to address the elephant in the room, or, and really be open and honest with one another about, one of the challenges that they're dealing with.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's freeing, scary, exciting. I will tell people that every time you leave an EOS session, you will be the strangest combination of elated, impatient, excited, and dead tired. Like your brain just can't do another rep,
Yeah.
But you can't wait to work the next day and put all these things in place.
I agree.
Friday.
At the end of a session, if at least most of the team is not both elated and exhausted, I don't feel like I did a great job that day.
That's not the end.
That should be the outcome.
That's right. Man, Paul, this has been fantastic. I feel like we need to do a couple more of these. There's a lot of different things to share, but thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for working with clients. I mean, I've certainly enjoyed that, and with my own company, it's made a huge difference. So I sure do appreciate it, and look forward to doing more of these.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's a topic that I'm passionate about. Would love to jump on again with you sometime. And you're right. There's probably a dozen or more things that we could kind of dig into.
I love it, man. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks for listening to Get the Intel. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check us out at vasforconstruction.com to see how we can advance your business.